Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Ladies and gentlemen, Toastmasters, that rhyme depicts the fate of each of King Henry VIII's 6 wives. The queens. If anyone here thinks history's boring, I intend to change your mind. Henry VIII's calamitous marital history has more drama than any episode of The Real Housewives, and is more outrageous than any Facebook status update you will ever see. And Henry VIII's marital history is extensive and requires that my telling of it be in 2 parts. This is part 1. Henry VIII was the King of England from 1509 to 1547. When he died, his waist was 52 inches around, his chest a barreling 54 inches. We know this because he had a suit of armor made that still exists and is on display at the Tower of London. Also, when King Henry died, both of his legs were afflicted with purulent ulcers, and it was said the odor was so bad you could smell him from 3 rooms away. Naturally, he was in a lot of pain and quite testy. But King Henry wasn't always that way. In his youth and in his prime, he was the quintessential Renaissance king. He was attractive, 6 foot 2 inches tall, 32-inch waist. We know that from suits of armor as well. He was athletic. He jousted, played tennis, and hunted. He was intellectual and creative. He composed music. They said his face was more beautiful than any woman's. And his calves. They loved to talk about those calves, and he wore garters to accentuate them. Henry VIII's first wife was Catherine of Aragon. Her parents were King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, the Ferdinand and Isabella that funded Christopher Columbus's Niña Pinta en Santa Maria. And when Catherine was only 3 years old, she was under contract to marry Henry's older brother, Arthur, who was 2. And back then, marriage between royalty and nobility was arranged in order to form political alliances, have diplomatic advantages, and for money. So when Catherine was 15 years old, she took the 3-month voyage over to England to marry Arthur, who was 14. And even the consummation of their marriage was negotiated. And Ferdinand and Isabella felt that at 15 years old, Catherine was too young to safely get pregnant and give birth to a child. And Henry VII, Arthur's father, agreed. There'd been no hanky-panky. So 2 teenagers got married, slept in the same bed, and nothing happened. And it's true, nothing happened. Arthur was sickly, and several months after the wedding, he died of sweating sickness. So with Arthur dead, the question became what to do about Catherine. Henry VII had no intention of returning her dowry to Ferdinand, so he toyed with Ferdinand for over 7 years, saying, well, one day I'll have her marry Henry. But then Henry VII died, and Henry VIII became king, and he finally married Catherine. He had no intention of returning the dowry either, and he knew her, he liked her, and they had a decent marriage. Yes, Henry had a few illicit affairs, and at least one recognized illegitimate child, but Catherine took it all in stride. But 16 years into the marriage, and Henry had grown very tired of Catherine's piousness, was well aware of her inability to provide him with a male heir, and King Henry had fallen in lust with who was to become his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Once again, the question became, what to do about Catherine? Henry tried to persuade her to agree to a divorce, and then she could go live happily in a nunnery somewhere, but she refused. So Henry spent the next 6 years courting Anne Boleyn and petitioning the Pope to grant him an annulment to his marriage with Catherine. Because you see, Anne Boleyn had told Henry, there shall be no hanky-panky. I'll be your queen, but not your mistress. A few years prior, Henry had had an illicit affair with Anne Boleyn's older sister, Mary, and then discarded Mary. So Anne Boleyn knew how that game was played, and she was playing to win. Well, eventually the Pope came down with his final answer to Henry, and it was, no, your marriage to Catherine is valid. So King Henry broke away from the Catholic Church designated himself the supreme head of the Church of England, and granted his divorce with Catherine that way. And then he married Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn and Henry were married for 3 years. And they had the type of relationship where they'd passionately fight with each other, and then make love, and then passionately fight some more, and make love again. Anne Boleyn was sophisticated, intelligent, and charismatic. She had the art of courtly love and flirtation mastered. But Anne Boleyn had an indiscreet tongue, and Anne Boleyn had enemies. And her most powerful enemy was Henry's right-hand man, Thomas Cromwell. And Thomas Cromwell saw the pull Anne Boleyn had over Henry, and he wanted that for himself. So he devised a plot to not only bring down Anne Boleyn, but to bring down those within Henry's court who favored her. So shortly after Queen Anne miscarried a son, Cromwell went to King Henry and told him, she's conspiring to kill you, and she's got all these lovers over here. Well, her alleged lovers being the court musician, a commoner, her very own brother, and King Henry's groom of the stool. Now, you and I might find that a dirty job, but this was a person who was in close proximity to the king. It was the king's confidant. He was with the king when the king had his private moments, if you know what I mean. So they were all tried and found guilty of treason. The death sentence for Anne Boleyn was going to be burned at the stake or beheaded. Now, to burn someone at the stake, apparently the first thing that burns are their clothes, and they fall off, and you have a naked queen up on the stake, and it was too scandalous they couldn't have it. So they brought in an expert executioner from France who used a sword, not an axe, as depicted by the British. And Anne Boleyn goes up to the scaffold, she lays her head on the block, and the executioner says, "Fetch me my sword." But he already had it in his hand the whole time. He just said that to distract her. So she's looking away, and that was the end of Anne Boleyn. That is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. There's more drama and 4 more wives to cover. Thank you.